Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CPAC Live. You know who I am. I'm Matt Schlapp, and I would just like to start off the show this time speaking a little bit from the heart. We are in very troublesome times in this country. Some of you might have heard or read that there is an angry mob out there, and the angry mob is aimed at statues and buildings, but the angry mob is also aimed at destroying people and destroying good people. How do we know that? Well, so much of their ire is aimed at Donald Trump, a president I think is literally preventing this country from collapsing and going into a radicalized abyss. But the angry mob is going to go after people who stand up for President Trump's policies. And certainly my wife and I have felt the sting of harsh rhetoric and terrible, obnoxious charges and the attempt to destroy every aspect of our lives. And I want you all to know that it's painful, but what I care more about is what you think of me. I care more about that I'm doing what I say I should do, and I'm being the kind of person I believe God wants me to be. If that gets the ire of people who can make me more wealthy or more famous, or more kind of like on the inside, I'm okay with losing all that. But I want everybody who's listening to this, who might be kind of questioning this moment of what's happening in America and wondering who's right and who's wrong. And I will simply say this: if you love your country, if you're a conservative who believes that Donald Trump is the right choice over Joe Biden, but yet you still respect liberals who have a different political view than you, and if you were saying to yourself, I'm proud of being an American, I'm proud of our history, even with its birth defects of starting off with legalized slavery, but we resolved these questions. We fought a war. Many, many Americans died. We changed our founding document, the Constitution. We added 3 civil rights amendments to make it illegal to have racial disparities. We've done the same thing with women in this country, which we don't talk enough about. We fixed a lot of these questions of inequality. And then we put a dagger through the heart of Jim Crow. And it was the Republican Party who led the way in all that. I'm proud to be a Republican. I'm proud to be a conservative. I'm very proud to be a Christian. If I didn't have my faith, I don't think I'd be able to get up in the morning. But I get up in the morning with a smile on my face. The sun is out. I got another day, a chance to make a difference, a chance to do what I was put here to do. When I hear these radical leaders move beyond Confederate statues and move to ripping down abolitionists, to Abraham Lincoln, to a saint of the church, Saint Junipero Serra, someone who helped Christianize the western part of this land, as Christopher Columbus did as well. And now they say we have to go after the statues of Jesus and his mother, who I respect and adore. I say no more. We moved beyond a terrible, terrible racial tragedy into this country into going after a search and destroy mission to get each and every Trump supporter. And I will tell you, I'm making this commitment to you. I'm going to fight this every step of the way if I lose everything in the process. Because that's what I learned in elementary school, public elementary school, that our founders did. And this is a founder's moment. This is a moment when we have to ask ourselves, what do Americans believe in? What will we stand for? And what will we say does not have a proper role in society? I always thought political disagreements would stay there. They don't anymore. If you have a political disagreement, they are going to try to destroy you. And I say to my friends in this town, the Swamp, who are watching someone like me or some other people who are Trump supporters get the ire of the mob, today it's me. Tomorrow it's any Republican, even establishment Republicans. Because anybody who believes in the idea of the family or the principles of the Christian religion or the fact that America is a good place, that's no longer acceptable. So that's how I start the show. I'm speaking from the heart. I'm filled with a lot of emotion these days, proper emotion and proper outrage. But I'm channeling it for good. And part of that good is we're going to have a great conversation with someone you love, Salena Zito. Salena, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
We love to read what you write because it's always infused with two things. It's infused with our history, and it's infused with how people outside of Washington view current events. As you read, turn on your television, talk to your neighbors, and you see this kind of ugly, angry mob, what's your response to it?
Well, it's really interesting for me. If anybody doesn't know, I spend most of my time outside of DC. I live outside of DC. I live in Pittsburgh, which I affectionately call the Paris of Appalachia. It sort of straddles Appalachia and the Midwest, and it's very, not only in mileage different from DC, but also pace of life and attitude. And I've been interviewing people consistently since the virus began, but also in the destruction of these statues. And it really breaks people's heart. Not because, let's just start with when they start pulling down statues of Grant and the religious leaders, and they're going to take Lincoln's statue down. It makes you realize that this was never about the Confederacy.
Never.
This was always about hating America. And that's the part that really gets to people's gut. We've been through a lot of things in the past few months. We've gone from, a great economy and going forward, not that we're not rolling back, but just think about the moment, right? We went from impeachment which gutted us, to a virus which has changed our entire lives, how we're able to conduct our faith, how our children go to school, how do they play, how do we some people haven't hugged people in over 90 days. That'd be me. And now we're watching the societal fabric just sort of being torn apart. If the Democrats think that they're winning people over with this moment, they're not. And what they're actually doing, and I interviewed Joe Manchin yesterday in Morgantown. He said, all you're doing is dividing people more. And all you're doing is having people walk away from a cause that is important and either not wanting to participate in the election or rethinking about what is important to you in the White House.
So as you talk to Americans that aren't in the swamp, they're not in Hollywood, they're not in New York City, the reaction you're getting from people that aren't that political is, this is a little scary. What do we believe in?
This is absolutely terrifying. And it also peels back understanding what has our education system been doing for the last generation? What did it teach our children? And as parents, were we responsible to make sure that they were learning all of history? I mean, one thing that I did when I was raising my children is we got in the car and went to places where things happened. Living in Western Pennsylvania, there's sort of an advantage there, right? We're not far from Gettysburg. We're not far from Fort Pitt. We're not far from Fort Necessity, where the French and Indian War began. And without the French and Indian War, there would have been no revolution. So I'm always made sure that my children understood the whole cloth of what happened. And I think parents need to be more responsible in doing that, because clearly our schools are not getting it done. If you're going to tear down a statue of Ulysses Grant or Abraham Lincoln, you really don't have an understanding of what it is to be American and what it means to have fought to preserve the Union.
Yeah, and specifically when I see these saints, Saint Junipero Serra being ripped down, because basically what the statement that makes, and it's not one statue, it's many statues. And he's the reason why there's a town called San Francisco, because he was Franciscan. If you go through all of this, this is not just about Donald Trump. As much as many of us really respect what he's doing, it's so much bigger. The reason why so many of us liked Donald Trump in 2016 was because finally somebody was listening and someone was willing to return rhetorically the punching with punches on our behalf. And
Right.
but it's beyond him. It's about America, it's about faith, and it's about these institutions which they want to bring down and set ablaze.
Right. So I think there's two important things here in response to that. First of all, when in 2016, when I was covering the election, and I understood long before, in July of 2016, I said, after I drove across the country, when I travel as a reporter, I do not fly, I do not take interstates, I don't take turnpikes, I only take back roads. I also only stay in bed and breakfast, because the first person you meet is a small business owner, and they know where all the bodies are buried, right? When I first understood that he was going to win, it was never about Donald Trump. It was about these people, their families, their communities, and their rootedness to place, and their rootedness and understanding of history. So that's an important nuance that I think a lot of reporters miss. They think this is some sort of cult and it's about Donald Trump. It is not.
No.
It is about voters and their families and their communities. Through generation after generation, have been disappointed, not just by establishment Democrats, but also by establishment Republicans.
That's right.
The second thing I think that is really important is that there's a lot of people out there that, you know, when we wrote that book, The Great Revolt, we did a survey afterwards, and we asked Trump voters in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, did you tell anybody in your family that you were going to vote for Donald Trump? 34%. 34%. And like 2016 is like a Disney movie compared to this, right?
Great, I completely agree.
34% did not tell a family member or a friend or a pollster that they were going to support Donald Trump.
How big would that be today, you think? It's got to be bigger.
Oh, I think it tops over 50%. I mean, you know, when I go out and interview people and I talk to them, I say, look, before I put your name in this story, you got to understand, do you have a social media presence? Do you own a business? Do you work for a small company? Because this might impact your life if I put your name in there. And I'm unwilling to do that unless they fully understand. And people are afraid of the damage, as you pointed out in your opening statement. It's the reason I'm not on Twitter anymore, because of the psychological damage that or economic or just your entire life can be destroyed by what someone says about you.
By your opinion.
This is America. For goodness sakes, we're supposed to robustly debate. We're supposed to be, it's a democracy, right? It's a Republican, but it's also a democracy. We're supposed to be offended every day in political discourse. We're not supposed to be destroyed. Big difference.
It's all about destruction today. And we did it to ourselves to a certain extent because we stood by, we were too passive. Yes, all the teachers were liberal in the schools, or at least a lot of them, and a lot of the administrators, and they started first by taking any idea that you could pray in school out of the school, and then that moved quickly into the idea that the schools seemed to be the tip of the spear on any kind of social change and social action, and some of that we agreed with, so we thought, well, okay, whatever. They'd learned less hard sciences. They've definitely learned a complete abominable aspect of our history. And it's gotten to the point today with both public and private schools that we're literally churning out millions of basically undereducated kids, a lot of white kids, who believe that America is evil and wrong, and that business people are greedy and bad, and that the church is hateful and mean and old-fashioned in a bad way. That's what we've created in way too many cases. And what you see in a lot of these riots, Salena, and I've infiltrated some passively just watching, is you think you're going to see all people of color. You see a lot of very radicalized young white kids in these rallies as well.
You know, this whole past two generations, when it comes to the education system, a lot of it has been about feelings. And when my kids would come home and say this or that, and I would tell them, feelings do not have an IQ. Do not base your understanding on history on feelings. You have to understand the whole thing. And the other point I wanted to make about Trump, and I forgot to, is that a lot of the people within the coalition that support Trump don't always particularly like his comportment.
Yes.
But they understand that he is the one thing standing between them and what's going on out there. He is the one thing, and maybe you can't be a nice guy. Maybe you can't be, sort of eloquent with your words if you're the guy that has to guard the gate against
Let me just say this. I actually have a reputation for being a nice person. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm a Kansan. We treat people with respect. We wave. We say hi and goodbye and thank you. That doesn't cut it. Being polite and respectful does not cut it. If you're on the other side, they want to destroy everything about you. And yes, I want somebody pushing back on that, because a democracy can't survive this.
No, absolutely not. It's one of the things I noticed in covering the Iowa caucuses in 2016. And I remember, when you cover a caucus, people have, especially Republican caucus in Iowa, all the voters are evangelical or conservative Christians, right? And you go in there with 4 people, and half the time people write it on their hands. And Ben Carson was always their first pick because he was just like them. Second pick was always Bobby Jindal. Third pick was always Ted Cruz. Then they'd get to Donald Trump and they'd say, he just might be mean enough to get the mattresses for us. I don't like the way he talks, but I like the way he stands up for the things that are important to us.
And what's interesting about the first 3 names you mentioned? Remember, you said Ben Carson.
Yeah.
A racist party would not all be for Ben Carson. Ben Carson actually led that race at one point in time.
Oh, yeah.
Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, right? Hispanics. They were very, very popular. I look at this, I look at what the news media says about our movement and our party, and I know you're a journalist, and then I look at reality. They don't comport to each other. And that has to end.
So nationally, and this is not where it counts, but nationally, 9% of voters voted Obama, Trump. But in the Great Lakes Midwest, that number was well over 23%. And they are offended that all of a sudden they have become racist.
That's right.
And I also don't understand why this has fallen on Trump. It bewilders me because this movement began back in Ferguson in 2014, August 9th, 2014. That's when this movement, where the sort of the granular part of it began. It's where Black Lives Matter went from a saying to a movement, and so all of a sudden that it's blamed on. I mean, it astounds me. I don't even have words to say about how frustrating it is.
And as you know, we have to we unfortunately have to come to an end with this really interesting segment, which we're going to do chapter 2 of soon. The one thing is that whether it's Ferguson or Minneapolis, is Donald Trump has nothing to do with these crimes that are committed. He had nothing to do with what I consider to be the murder of George Floyd. Nothing to do with it. Minneapolis is run by left-wing Democrat socialists. The state is run by left-wing Democrat socialists. Amy Klobuchar, who's as left can be for a Democrat, used to be the attorney general. But yet they insert us in their mistakes, which has created this chaos. And we get indicted because we look at an angry mob that's ripping down our history, setting fire to things, stealing every crime you can imagine. And we get inserted because we have a revulsion to that type of criminal behavior. And so that's why I want to end this interview how I started the show. I urge you all, put your flag out, pray for America. This is a critical time. And for Salena Zito, the pen that you use to write the words, it's more important than what the kids are learning in school because they're not learning it. They got to learn from people like you. So I just want to encourage you. I love your little kitchen behind you. Don't spend too much time in it, because we need you to spend a lot more time in front of your computer and get in those bed and breakfasts and tell the stories of the Americans who are out there in the middle of the country and everywhere else who love this country and every day are making it a better place to live because of who they are and what they do. So keep doing that, okay, Salena?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm always on the road. I think I have almost 200,000 on my Jeep Cherokee.
That's awesome. And the website is on the screen. Everyone go to the website, read everything this wonderful woman writes. Thank you, Salena, for being with us. We're going to now show you a brief clip to a great CPAC we had in Minnesota on September 11th. And the event was called Some People Did Something. Here's a great clip from Minneapolis. A happier time.
With the next generation, with millennials, sometimes who may not have lived through 9/11 the same way we did. And when you have progressives trying to scrub what it meant, what do we do? And Cotton had tough words. He says, well, that's on you guys. It's on the people that did live through it to make sure that the next generation understood what we went through and what it all meant. What would you say to the young people of today about what 9/11 meant?
I have an excellent message for that. During my career, my life, I'm 49 years old, I responded to the 93 World Trade Center bombing as a rookie police officer in Manhattan. I was working in Manhattan that morning when that bomb went off. I responded to 9/11 and worked there for almost a year after, sifting through the rubble as a detective. After I retired due to line of duty injuries and moved to rural Pennsylvania and became a director of public safety there, I ended up directly dealing with the Fort Dix terror plot guys who were practicing in my community with paintball guns to attack Fort Dix. 3 terrorist attacks, 2 successful, 1 in the end stages of planning that I've personally dealt with. If they don't step up to the plate, we will live another 9/11. That's as most direct as I could put it. And those are the facts. It's not like they're going away not planning these things.
That's a great clip and fond memories of having CPAC Minnesota in Minneapolis during much happier and more tranquil times. We're now joined by somebody who joined us at that CPAC, Jason Lewis, who was a member of Congress and is now the stalwart for the Republican Party to beat a very lefty Democrat incumbent. And we hope he will be a future senator and will be a senator very soon. Jason, thanks for being with us.
Matt, always great to be with CPAC. I not only attended in Minneapolis and Washington, D.C. as a member of Congress, and many years before that, every year on Radio Row when I was in broadcasting. So it's always great to be with you guys.
So on broadcasting, you talked about a lot of things you fear in the country, and now we're seeing them come to light on our streets. You live in Minnesota. What is going on in Minnesota? What's the consequences of everything that happened ever since the death of George Floyd, which I think we all, when we look at that video, it's a terrible thing to see.
Well, the consequences are the whole injustice, and we all wanted justice for Mr. Floyd, but the whole movement's been hijacked now by, frankly, violent, profane, and illiterate vandals. And we're at an inflection point in Minnesota, much like a microcosm of the country, whereas Hennepin and Ramsey, that's Minneapolis and St. Paul, become so radically blue that it's turning the rest of the state amazingly red. So I will win the 1st. I will win the 8th district with all the union miners up there who just want to earn a living. We'll outperform in the 7th and the 6th. So it's really not unlike Pennsylvania, where the president underperformed a little bit compared to Romney in 2016, but won the state where Romney didn't. And that's why Minnesota's at the epicenter of things bad, as we spoke about, but really at the epicenter of this 2020 race. And we're going to win this race because the outstate votes are many more than people think. Romney won the 85 counties outside of the metro by 56,000. Trump won them by 291,000. There are many more of those voters coming our way now because of this chaos.
So you don't see the Democratic Party looking at this and saying, oh my gosh, we have to step back from this. We have to become a little more centrist. What you actually see is a Democratic Party that's almost like in a death contract with these radicals to take the party even further to the left, which is presenting a great opportunity for people that love this country and want to stand up for its institutions.
That's exactly right. We held a press conference at the 3rd precinct. This is the famous precinct in South Minneapolis that was abandoned by the mayor and Governor Walz. And literally we said, look, I authored juvenile justice reform when I was in Congress, and it was signed into law by the president. I backed the Scott bill. But the DFL reaction was the Democrat Farm Labor Party. Today, it's without the farm and the labor. But the Democrat Farm Labor Party reaction was, oh, Lewis denounces police reform. They are all in on Antifa and this violent uprising. And the difference between 1968 and now, Matt, is in 1968, most Americans and even Democrats realized the SDS and the Weather Underground didn't speak for America. Now that's the Democrat base. And I don't care whether it's Ilhan Omar or Ocasio-Cortez or Tina Smith, my opponent, they are leaning into this. And it is driving the suburbs away, and it's driving greater Minnesota away.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, because I think it's a tragedy, but I'm also somebody that's looking for opportunity, and it gives someone like you, a sane person, a great opportunity to say to the voters of Minnesota, Ilhan Omar is not the personification of the state.
No, that's quite right. I mean, again, these urban cores are very liberal. Betty McCollum in St. Paul, Ilhan Omar in Minneapolis, and they're going to win again and again and again. But they have hijacked the Democrat Party, to your point, and they've got nowhere to go. Look, public order and the rule of law is the first object of government. Right. That's why you have it. And so if you're going to abandon that, and by the way, as an aside, take away your Second Amendment rights, Minnesotans are going, what good are you folks? And that's really where we're at now. They think it's a privilege to call the police. It's not a privilege. It is a right to call the police. If you don't call the police, who are you going to call? Dr. Phil? And that's really what they're telling Minnesotans, and Minnesotans aren't buying it. So, it's the only silver lining coming out of this chaos. It's really a tragedy for our state.
Now, give us another look into the state of this, almost like the psychological state of law enforcement, cops. How do they do their job?
They don't. I married into a police family. I tell people I didn't know much about cops until I married one. My wife was on the St. Paul PD for 7 years. Her dad, 28 years. And I talked to them again at our press conference on Monday, and they are just destitute. If nobody has their back, they are not going to police. And if they don't, there will be afraid to arrest. You're going to have more resistance on arrest because now these people feel emboldened because the authorities have backed down in Minnesota. Governor Walz called it a denial to engage, I think was his euphemism. Can you imagine such a thing? Mayor Daley is spinning in his grave in Chicago. I mean, this is nuts. And so we've got an existential crisis, to use that overused term, but this really is existential. If we don't get a handle on this, and now it's spread. And that's the tragedy of Minnesota. We're not exporting Paul Bunyan anymore. We exported this chaos. Once they saw that they could overtake a city of Minneapolis, and it spread into St. Paul that week, the rest of the country and Antifa and the vandals realized we can go anywhere. So now we've got new countries in Seattle, Washington, D.C., day in, day out. Something's got to be done. And let me be blunt with you. The only way, quite frankly, Republicans lose this issue, conservatives lose this issue, if something isn't done. Because they see that Democrats have abandoned Americans who value public order, the rule of law, and life, liberty, and property. We have to stand up for it.
And what do you think about this new chilling call to desecrate churches, to take down statues of Jesus, Mary, St. Joseph, the knocking down of saints of the church? I don't quite know how to handle this. I mean, I know I want to stop it. But why would someone be filled with so much hate? Why is the Christian church, which does so much good in the world, seen as a force of evil?
Because it's a symbol of Western civilization. This is not about erasing history. This is about rewriting history. This is not even about George Floyd anymore. It's about the critical legal studies movement in every university. That's what it's about. That's where it started. That's where it was hatched. And it's a Marxist movement that is dedicated to overturning the values of Western civilization and our constitutional republic. Life and liberty and property, all of those things are on the chopping block. So naturally, churches, sadly, many of whom have forsaken God for liberation theology, are not going to be spared just because they fed the crocodile the most. They're coming after those. They're coming after corporate America, which has behaved shamefully in some of this stuff by paying ransom. All of our institutions are under the gun, and they are running for their lives because these people cannot be satisfied.
Hey, Jason, I'm not going to run.
Yeah, me either.
Are you going to run?
I'm not going to run. Well, I'm running for the Senate, but I'm not running from this mob.
So you're running to the Senate because I believe that this is one of these races that a lot of people who don't live in Minnesota and stuff might not be focusing on. But I actually think you have excellent chance of winning, which is why we have you on the show. And quite honestly, it's why we invited you to CPAC. And I think your voice is awfully important. Here's the problem. Nancy Pelosi might still have the gavel. By the way, I think it's in jeopardy. I'm just telling you. I said it after impeachment. I'm going to reiterate it now. It's a story that all the political reporters say there's no chance she loses that gavel. I actually see some opportunities here. But let's say she has that gavel. The likelihood of them impeaching Trump again if he's reelected, I think is very high. We need you in the Senate because they're not going to stop. This is the latest tactic to destroy America and to take out Trump. Do you agree with me? They'll go right back and try to impeach him again and try to push him out of office.
I don't think so. If Republicans get close or obviously overtake the House once again. But your point is really good. The Senate is the last firewall. We cannot lose the Senate. And the good news in Minnesota is the president only lost by 44,000 votes in 2016 with nobody on the ground. Guess what? He's got 25 people on the ground now. We're ramping up to 65. He's going to throw $10 million in this race. He wants to come here 3, 4, 5 times. And we can gain 300,000 votes in greater Minnesota to overturn the metro. This is a doable race. But more importantly, given the landscape, this is a must race. We have got to flip Minnesota. And I think we can, to your very point. And if we just, people forget, Reagan never had the House. He had to work with Tip O'Neill, but we got so close in 1980 that he went over their heads and got the agenda done. We will do the same if we hold the Senate and the president gets reelected.
That was in the days of a conservative Democrat, that Elliot Engel, who wasn't any conservative, but at least pro Israel, to have lost his primary. But what we have today is not the conservative Democrat or the moderate Democrat. They're gone. You have the lying Democrat. You have the Democrat who wins in a Trump district by acting like they're moderate. And what you're saying is that when they see the reaction across this country to the radicalism of the agenda of Joe Biden and the Democrat socialists, they're going to realize that, once again, Donald Trump isn't winning because he's an aberration of history, or Donald Trump is winning because people are voting for him and voting for this idea that there are things we hold in common as Americans and they can't be under attack.
And let's be honest, he brought our party dragging and kicking in some cases into issues we were putting off for years and years. Pro-life, the foreign policy that was protected our allies but got out of endless wars, immigration, energy, anti-China, all of those issues that sometimes some of us didn't want to take on, but the president has, and he's led on that very point. Now you've got opponents like my opponent, Senator Tina Smith, Al Franken's a replacement. She's the accidental senator, appointed lieutenant governor, appointed senator, and now she's throwing her lot in with Ilhan Omar, calling all Minnesotans racist, and then saying the police play a dangerous role in society. As you just pointed out, Matt, they have these codes. You know, they will not condemn the violence, and then those kind of give a little boost to these radicals. That's where the Democrat Party is. There's no Dan Rostenkowski here.
Yeah, that's exactly. Oh my gosh, I never thought I'd miss Dan Rostenkowski. God rest his soul. Jason Lewis, we appreciate you so much for all the work you're doing in your state, for taking your life and risking a lot by running for the Senate in these really ugly and caustic times. And we really wish you well. We're right there with you. Let's bring this race home. Let's get you in the Senate, and let's get this country back on track.
I don't think we have a choice. Come on back to Minnesota, man.
Hey, look, we might not be living in the swamp much longer, so we'll be shopping. Maybe be high on.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much.
Best of luck. Thank you all for tuning in.
And it's Lewis4MN.
Okay, one more time.
Lewis4FORMN.com.
Okay, that'll be on the screen as well, I'm sure. And thank you very much, Jason. And thank you, all of you, for tuning in to CPAC Live. And we're going to have another great show for you coming up. And give us your feedback. Give us your comments. We love hearing from you. Let's work together to save our country. Take care.